This movie changed the Academy Awards and serves as a memoriam for a potential star. This is the greatest sequel to Heat Michael Mann never made, and a love letter to Chicago. A cultural phenomenon that won't soon be forgotten. This is The Dark Knight.
Where do we begin? A year ago, these cops and lawyers wouldn't dare cross any of you. I mean, what happened?
So what are you proposing?
It's simple. Kill the Batman. Here's my card.
Bruce, this is Harvey Dent.
Rachel's told me everything about you.
I certainly hope not. You once told me that we'd be together. Did you mean it?
Bruce, don't make me your only hope for normal life.
You're Alfred, right?
That's right, sir.
Any psychotic ex-boyfriends I should be aware of?
Oh, you have no idea.
This is the Superhero Pantheon. On this podcast, we take one superhero film a week and decide whether it should be in the Pantheon, the pile of shame, or somewhere in between. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5-star review so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at The Real World are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you could do so in 2 ways. First, send an email to superheropantheon@gmail.com. Second, find us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. Brian, I wish I had a hot take on this one. When Mike Thomas and Matt Waters did their episode on The Dark Knight, one of the things that they made the argument for is that Batman Begins is in fact better than this movie. We do not have that hot take. I think we both agree that Batman Begins is phenomenal. We put it into the Pantheon last week. But Brian, I know that for both of us, The Dark Knight is one of the most significant movies of our experiences going to the cinema and experiencing something that is just unlike any other superhero movie that has been made before this, and even since. I think this entire trilogy is really very unique, but so much about this film stands out. The number of iconic, memorable shots in this movie. There are things that are just burned into my head for the rest of my life, and some of the musical cues and some of the dialogue and some of the scripted lines. Everything about this movie just works on a level that I don't think any other superhero film works, even within this own trilogy. And I think Batman Begins and The Dark Knight Rises certainly have their great moments and their great iconic shots as well. But this one, you get literally a significant shot like every 5 to 10 minutes, it seems.
Yeah, I remember the initial trailer, even before Heath Ledger even died, in January of 2018, and seeing it and just being blown away. And it was like a 90-second trailer. And just seeing it for the first time, I was like, this seems completely different than any of this like superhero stuff we've seen up to this point. And up to that point, we had seen the Fantastic Fours, we had seen the Spider-Man movies, but it just seems like a completely different level of like sophistication and creativity and seriousness. And just seeing like Batman and the Joker stare each other down for like the 30 seconds or whatever, and Heath Ledger just kind of like losing his shit as the Joker on screen, like, for that 90-second trailer, I thought it was like the greatest 90-second trailer I'd ever seen in my life at that point. And I was just so hyped. And then when the movie comes out, and then immediately after, I'm like hanging out at like these college parties and just like talking with people. And not even me bringing it up, but everyone else is bringing up The Dark Knight and how much it just infected their brains. And like all these conversations I was having with people, everyone was just saying that they couldn't like have the movie leave their head. And like I know multiple people, like almost everyone I know saw that movie multiple times in theaters because they couldn't get it out of their head, and it was just something infectious about the performance of Heath Ledger, the cinematography, the music of Hans Zimmer, the direction of all the characters. Everything just kind of came together for this one perfect movie, it seems, and I don't think anyone can ever top it. Endgame can, you can argue Endgame could have topped it, but I don't think anything will be ever like this again. Like, it's a once in a lifetime performance from Heath Ledger that we'll never ever gonna get again. No one's gonna be ever top this Joker performance, no matter how hard you try and how hard you try to get crazy with the role. It's just, remarkable. Just like 11 years later, it stands the test of time. It still feels timeless, even with the technology in the movie. And just even like the idea that they started shooting IMAX for this movie has completely changed the game because we have whole movies shot in IMAX now, and like 11 years later, like you're paying extra just to go to an IMAX screening, and it's worth it. Just so, this movie changed things for the culture. It changed things in Hollywood. It changed things in like the mainstream. It really made like I don't know, like the Joker was not nearly as like prevalent and like culturally relevant. I mean, yeah, we had the big summer of Batman in '89, but just it felt like everywhere that summer I would look, it would be Heath Ledger's face on everything, and it would be haunting and sad because of the tragedy. But like at the same time, it was just like you couldn't escape it.
Absolutely, and we have a ton of positive things to say about this movie, but I think something that has lingered over this film is the passing of Heath Ledger, and I want to focus some of our attention on his untimely passing. He passed away from drug toxicity on January 22nd, 2008, and there was a lot of speculation at the time that this was because of the movie that this happened. Soon after Ledger's death was announced, Warner Brothers issued a statement that verified that Ledger had finished all of his scenes in principal photography, as well as post-production fulfillments, some of the looping lines. A lot of that has to do because of the IMAX cameras, and the Joker is a completed final performance. Of course, there were rumors that this role had taken a toll on Ledger's mental state, causing him to become depressed, but his family has made it clear from the moment that these rumors started that he was not depressed because of this role. He had tons of fun playing it. He took it very seriously, but he had a number of other issues, including insomnia throughout his life, and he would often take different pills and prescription drugs. Something his sister had actually warned him against the night before his death, and unfortunately, the night of his passing, he took a fatal combination of pills, and that is what killed him. And I think it's one of those situations where people have tried to make this more than it actually is, but the reality is that based on everything that I've seen and I've read, it was just a tragic accident.
Yeah, and it's so weird because I had some friends that got so obsessed with Heath Ledger, like after they saw the movie and just tried to read so much into it, like a lot of people did at the time. And unfortunately, it was just an accident. And I've been worried. Like I'm one of those people that doesn't really trust prescription pills a lot, and that's one of those things that really scares me. And it's one of these incidents that also kind of like shook me up a little bit, just kind of seeing like just simple like little things of like combining pills, just not knowing any better and causing it to end your life. It just kind of shook me up a little bit, to be honest. And to this day, I still have this kind of fear of like taking like prescription pills and just like not trusting like what goes into my body, that kind of thing. So there's something like this kind of incident kind of like wakes you up a little bit. And I know a lot of people wanted to read more into it and kind of read like how the Joker and this idea of the Joker and chaos and blah 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 it took him over, and people want to kind of blur the lines and kind of combine reality with fiction kind of thing. But what it really was is just like a straight up accidental overdose, and the performance was pretty much separate from it. But because of the timing of everything, it's kind of like thought of together now.
And I think there is something to be said for method acting. When we talk about Jared Leto playing this role, we're going to talk even more about this. But there were a lot of rumored choices to portray the Joker, but Heath Ledger had always been Christopher Nolan's foremost choice for the role. There were a lot of critiques at the time about Heath Ledger potentially playing this, just as there is a controversy about all the actors who don the cape and cowl or are playing this particular role. Ledger and Nolan had met during the Batman Begins casting process for the role of Bruce Wayne, but Nolan and Heath agreed Ledger was wrong for the part. When casting the part of the Joker, Nolan met with several other actors before Ledger, but found them reluctant to take the role because of the popularity of Jack Nicholson's performance on Batman. Upon meeting with Ledger again, Nolan recognized him as the perfect choice for the part. When asked the reason for this unexpected casting, Nolan simply replied, "Because he's fearless." And I think the biggest thing that Heath Ledger did is he played the role completely differently than Jack Nicholson. Jack Nicholson is playing the Joker, but he's kind of playing the Joker as Jack Nicholson, in a way. It's really hard to separate those two. I think what makes Heath Ledger's performance different is that you don't even feel like it's him in the role. And I actually feel that Tom Hardy does something very similar in the next movie, in that it's almost impossible to separate the actor from the performance, because it just feels like that is the Joker on the screen. That is not Heath Ledger playing the Joker, but this guy is turning in this incredible performance, and he has seemingly disappeared into the role. And I think that's another reason that people have tried to make connections with his possible death, but ultimately, he did take the role seriously, as he spent time away in a motel for a few weeks, and during this extended stay of seclusion, he delved deep into the psychology of the character. He devoted himself to developing the Joker's every tick, namely the voice and the sadistic-sounding laugh. For the voice, Ledger's goal was to create a tone that didn't echo the work Jack Nicholson did in his 1989 performance as the Joker. Ledger's interpretation of the Joker's appearance was primarily based on the chaotic, devastated look of punk rocker Sid Vicious, combined with the psychotic mannerisms of Malcolm McDowell's character Alex Delange from A Clockwork Orange. And also, one of his most notable tics is the way that he is constantly licking his lips. And one of the reasons that was the case is because of the prosthetic that he was wearing, and that he just turned that into a tic of his, and he kind of made it work for the character. This is something that was discussed in the documentary I'm Heath Ledger, which you can find on demand on the Paramount Network if you are curious. I had been meaning to watch it before this, but I didn't really have the time. So there's a lot to say about Heath Ledger and this role, of course. He also won an Academy Award for this, and he was the first person to ever win an Academy Award for an acting performance in a superhero movie. I think there's a lot of reasons why this happened. Maybe, was it the best performance of that year? Perhaps. But I think there's also this idea that Heath Ledger was a potential star. He had been in Brokeback Mountain a few years ago, and he was someone that people were taking very seriously. And he was probably someone that was going to win a number of awards and be regarded as one of our great actors. But just like your River Phoenix is, and some of those people, this is kind of his last stand, so to speak. And I think that his Academy Award is at least in part due to his unfortunate passing.
I mean, I still think he deserves it because, like, the idea that him trying to separate the performance from Jack Nicholson, that was the smart move. Like, don't go in there trying to do a Jack Nicholson impersonation. Like, I feel like Jared Leto went in there trying to do a Heath Ledger impersonation, and that's kind of where he went wrong. Here, he kind of just made it his own, man, and you could tell, like, I think that's what it is. Like, there's something about, like you said, like that punk rock feeling about the character. Like, that kind of really drew in people. Like, because I know, like, the people that were drawn to him were not even comic book fans. They were, like, kids in their early 20s, you know what I mean, in college, trying to discover themselves, and kind of, like, idolized Heath Ledger for this performance because it was, like, this thing of, like, going on a limb and, you know, living a life of chaos, and, you know what I mean, just that idea of, like, living like the Joker, kind of this freedom, you know what I mean, like, to do whatever, and that idea kind of, like, sticks and, you know, attracts young people, which is why I think he became this kind of, like, icon after his death and this performance, and, like, people just wanted to, like, you know, idolize him, and I get that. It's very much like that idea, like with River Phoenix. Like people still idolize him after his death for the what ifs and the potentials of what if what would have become of his career kind of thing. And it's the same thing with Heath Ledger, and like you're right, like him and Brokeback Mountain, like I don't know if he should have won that year, but he like was fucking fantastic, like transformative in that role too. And you can tell he's got like this talent to like transform himself, which is really hard to do. And he completely transforms himself here, and it's like it blows you away, and you're just wondering, like, like, is he really there mentally? Because like on screen, it just feels like he's not there, like mentally. It's like something completely took over his brain, and the idea that like even Michael Caine got freaked out on set by him, just like to scare a veteran actor like that on set, and that age difference, and all the time that Michael Caine's have been on all these different movies, and they get freaked out by just Heath Ledger just acting like the Joker, like that tells you a lot.
And I think one of the other things that I really appreciated, not just in the performance, where there are a couple references to the Joker mentioning where he got the scars, but he's obviously lying in at least most of those cases. But it was decided by Christopher Nolan, Jonathan Nolan, and David S. Goyer that they would not explore the Joker's origins. That was so the character could be presented as an absolute agent of chaos. And I think one of the big mistakes that a lot of superhero movies make is they try to give way too much pathos. And I think there are certain cases where it does work. Like I think of Killmonger or Black Panther. I think having an origin story and giving him background does help the character, and it makes him more sympathetic in a way. But I think with a character like the Joker, who is a cartoon character, even though these Dark Knight movies are so much more grounded, I don't think it makes sense for him to have this big background. And that's why I'm still a little dubious of whether Todd Phillips' Joker is going to work, because I'm not sure that the background of the Joker is all that interesting.
I feel that too, because like the way that he keeps changing the story and messes with your head, like at the first time the first time you notice that he's lying based on the second time he's telling the story about his scars, you immediately realize, okay, this guy's never going to tell you anything. And then when Batman thinks he found him in his or in his apartment and realizes it was just like a front, and we never even know like who his actual identity is. He doesn't have any identification. It's great, man, because it just adds to the mystery, and it adds to his, the pathos of the character for this version of it. And it's just like, like where does he come from, and like how did he get the money, and they just never answer it. But he just seems like he's always one step ahead, and you know what I mean. Like it's just like he's so much smarter than Batman at times, but it's weird because like you never know where he's coming from and where he gets all his money, but like it blows you away that he's one step ahead all the time.
And we will talk about how the Joker actually functions in this movie when we talk about the villains, but there are a couple more Heath Ledger things that I want to talk about. There is an incredible moment. It's kind of become a gif over the last couple of years, but there's a moment when he is inside his jail cell clapping, and he is mocking and kind of being sarcastic towards the Gotham police as Commissioner Gordon is promoted. The clapping was not scripted, but Christopher Nolan immediately encouraged the crew to continue filming, and the sequence was included in the final cut. So that is one instance of just how good Heath Ledger is in this movie. And another instance is that he is actually the one who directed the homemade videos that the Joker sends to GCN. The first video involving the fake Batman was done under writer-producer and director Christopher Nolan's supervision, but then Nolan had thought Ledger had done so well with that sequence, he thought there was no need for him to actually be there, so Heath Ledger basically got to do it on his own. And I think that, again, just shows kind of the potential of this guy, not just as a performer, but I guess as a potential director down the line, too.
Yeah, those were like some creepy 30-second sequences, and like, I don't know, I don't know if he just got into the character or whatever, but it was really well done. I don't know if he was be a good director, but um, I remember him like talking into the camera, and then like the camera making that weird noise because he was talking way too close to the mic, which kind of adds to the creepiness of the videos as well because it seems amateurish. But I think that was the feeling he was going for with those videos because it felt like an amateur, like it reminded me of like those Iraq videos that came out earlier in the decade. Didn't it feel like that? Where like you were.
It definitely felt much more grounded, just like Batman Begins in a way. I called this the best sequel to Heat that will never be made. That is the vibe that I got pretty consistently, both from a color palette standpoint and just some of the visceral ways that this movie is shot. And I even think, just like there is the big bank heist that occurs towards the middle of Heat, I in a way compare that to the big chase scene that happens in the middle of this movie. Just the way that the formula that the both movies follow, the epic qualities of it, the fact that Batman has to break a little bad to get what he wants. I've definitely gotten some of those Heat vibes from this movie, a bit more so than what you were talking about. But just to kind of finish up the Heath Ledger conversation, Michael Caine also walked away incredibly impressed and said that this was the best version of the character that he has ever seen, and was even scared when he first saw him coming off the elevator when they are in Bruce Wayne's penthouse. So that praise from Michael Caine is very high. And we're about 15 minutes in, and the only thing we've talked about is Heath Ledger. We've still got so much more to talk about, even with the notes, because I think one of the things that makes this movie so incredible looking is the fact that this was shot in IMAX format, or at least some of it was. There were specific IMAX cameras used. Writer, producer, and director Christopher Nolan had wanted to shoot in the IMAX format for years, and he used this movie as his opportunity to do so. There are 6 major action-heavy sequences, along with various high-altitude shots that were filmed on the IMAX ratio. And Brian, I don't know about you, but when I was in the theater and I saw the screen go full in the IMAX theater, you knew some shit was about to go down.
Yeah, that was the feeling too. Like the first time they did that, it felt like this big moment was about to happen, and they set it up right. And now it just become the norm where everything is just shot in IMAX. Where even Dark Knight Rises was completely shot in IMAX. But this was pretty revolutionary at the time because like IMAX theaters were not a normal thing as they are now. You know what I mean? Like it was very rare. I think it would be on school field trips you go to an IMAX theater just to watch a nature video or something like that. And the idea of doing a whole movie or even sequences at the time just in all in IMAX cameras was just like exciting because like oh my god, like it's going to be so huge and loud and the explosions and blah blah blah, and it paid off. And now like all these big tentpole Hollywood movies are doing all these IMAX things now, and like it's become a standard in the MCU to shoot like in almost an IMAX camera. So I think this kind of changed the game a lot, and his thinking was like way ahead of its time in terms of the camera work, and like he knew like what was coming in terms of like superhero cinematography, and he was just right on the money doing it on IMAX because it just makes everything more of a grand scale and it works well.
Right, and I think that part of the visuals have to do with the fact that so much of this movie looks organic and it does not look like it was just put into a computer, and there's a lot of CGI. I think the only place where CGI is really noticeable is with Two-Face, and I think there's some very good reasons for that to occur, which we can get into in just a couple minutes. But one of the 4 IMAX cameras was actually destroyed in the big chase scene with Joker and the SWAT. That's very expensive. The good news is that they were able to pay it off because, Brian, a part of the legacy of this movie is that this is the first comic book movie to ever make $1 billion. This is a regular occurrence for MCU movies, but at this point it really was a very, very big deal. David S. Goyer and Christopher Nolan collaborated on the story of this movie. The screenplay was actually written by Nolan and his brother Jonathan, who we talked about last week, and kind of what he's been able to do in Hollywood ever since then. David S. Goyer stated, "I can't believe my name is on a movie this good." And my reaction, Brian, I can't either.
Yeah, he got lucky on that one, but it was more of a collaborative effort. And we talk about too many cooks in the kitchen sometimes, but sometimes it just works when you have, if you have everyone on the same page, and luckily everyone was on the same page in terms of the script for this one. But usually a singular vision's better, but in this case, they kind of did a shared vision and just kind of played off of everyone's strengths.
It's pretty remarkable. One of the big controversies of this movie is that it was not nominated for an Academy Award. If you go back and you look at the nominees for this year, the year that this movie came out, it is absurd that this and WALL-E were not included among the Best Picture nominees because it is some weak sauce. You're talking about movies like The Reader and Milk and Frost Nixon. These are some utterly forgettable movies. If you go back to 2007 with No Country for Old Men and There Will Be Blood and Zodiac and things like that. That I can understand. 2007 is a really strong year in cinema. 2008 is not. And the fact that this movie and Wall-E did not get nominated for Best Picture, it's utterly ridiculous. And that's why we now have as many as 10 nominees instead of just 5. And I can't help but think that The Dark Knight got royally screwed in not just being nominated, but not potentially winning.
I still think that it got punished for being a comic book movie, like even in 2008, and they did not want to give it credit. And like, I thought it was just such bullshit because no one remembers Slumdog Millionaire. Nobody remembers that movie. Like, I know Danny Boyle remembers that movie because it's a Danny Boyle, flick. But like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's not the most memorable movie of 2008. 11 years later, it's clearly not the most memorable movie of 2008, nor is it the best movie of 2008. I mean, clearly it's a Dark Knight. Wally, I understand. Like, I'm not as big as high as Wally, but like Dark Knight was clearly in the top three that year, and it wasn't even nominated. And I was just so frustrated, and I thought it was bullshit. And I was glad that Heath Ledger got the nomination because that was like a shoe in, and it was obvious. And if there weren't, it was going to be really, really big controversy. But I think that was just kind of like a bone they were giving us comic book fans because it feels like it was like a tease. You know what I mean? Like, we'll give you this, but we're not going to give you a Best Picture nomination. We didn't get that till Black Panther.
All right, let's talk about some of the other people that were involved. Of course, this was the return of Christian Bale to this role. The Growl, which was made fun of a little bit in Batman Begins, it's only worse here. It has been parodied countless times. The common misconception is that Christian Bale was fully responsible for this voice. The real voice during filming was more toned down and then heightened to a rougher, grittier vibe during post-production under the decision of writer, producer, and director Christopher Nolan. So I think it was kind of more of a collaboration. This is the one thing that I think Ben Affleck's version of Batman does better, is that the Growl is much more well explained. The Growl here deserves to be parodied.
Yeah, but I keep thinking like it works for me because it clearly makes it seem like it's not Bruce Wayne. You know what I mean? Like he's clearly. I mean, it really covers up his voice a lot, and I know it's funny and whatever, but I mean, the idea of protecting your identity and like covering up your voice, like that makes sense to me. But I guess at the time, like they didn't think like maybe we could just digitize it and have like something on like his suit that can kind of digitize his voice and change it. But they didn't really think of that at the time.
So here's the one thing I'll say is that I don't think it's as bad as people made it out to be at the time. I think it is a little bit annoying, but I don't think it's something that takes a lot away from the movie, but I do wish that they had handled that part a little bit better. Bruce Wayne's penthouse was shot on the ground floor of an office building in downtown Chicago. During the daytime, the same space was redressed and used for Harvey Dent's press conference scenes. Some other things about Chicago and the connections to this movie. That is really Christian Bale standing on top of the Sears Tower, which is now known as the Willis Tower in Chicago, over 100 stories high. They were originally going to use a stunt double, but Bale insisted he do it himself. And I know that this is something that you made a note of in the first one, that iconic shot of Batman. And you're going to love this one. The final fight scene between the Joker and Batman was shot in the Trump Tower in Chicago during its construction.
Well, we can ignore that part, can't we? But yeah, just the whole idea of like him fighting. I mean, just the set pieces alone. You know what I mean? It's just like the idea that they burn Wayne Manor down, and that's still a significant part of it. And like he's like still Batman, but like in this underground, like under the apartment building or whatever, and under in the container at the port. The idea that him like he's still doing it, but like from like a smaller perspective, a completely different perspective, because like we're so used to the Batcave. In this case, there is no Batcave, right? Like that was a first, but it really didn't like matter. But we just accepted it. So I thought that was a nice little change that we're not in a Batcave. We're in this bright, like a really brightly lit room underneath the container, and everything is kind of out in the open and exposed. I love that visual, like of that room.
Brian, if there's one thing I want you to do, if you ever come to Chicago, I want you to watch this movie just before you come here, and then walk around downtown, and you will understand just how similar Gotham is to Chicago. It is unbelievable. The Dark Knight Rises and Batman Begins have it a little bit, but this is Chicago. I mean, there are literal scenes where there are barely any changes made to the city with the different banks and whatnot. And even when Bruce Wayne is driving his Lamborghini down Lake Street, I mean, I've seen those buildings. This is so much a part of what this movie is, and Chicago is so important. So that's definitely something you want to do if you ever come here, Brian.
I'll take that into consideration. I almost went last December, but luckily I didn't do that because I would have frozen my ass off.
No, you do not. You do not want to come in December. You want to come in like June or July, the 2 months when it is not freezing cold. We have gone 30 minutes, and we have not even mentioned Aaron Eckhart as Two-Face. And as good as Heath Ledger is, and I think he absolutely deserved an Academy Award, I think he is the best performance in this movie, I think Aaron Eckhart is pretty spectacular. And I think the way that his transition from Harvey Dent to Two-Face is done extremely well. And Brian, I know that you are the person that really loves prosthetics and kind of more realistic makeup, but I think in this specific case, going with something that is CGI made a lot more sense. And the fact of the matter is that when you're adding makeup, it's just adding to his face. And in this case, they wanted to make it look like that some of his face had been burned away. So I think it made so much sense. I think in a way the CGI, I think it could be done even better now. I still think it mostly holds up, and what I appreciate so much is the fact that they are still able to keep Two-Face grounded. Unlike Tommy Lee Jones, Aaron Eckhart, even when he becomes Two-Face, is not hamming it up. He doesn't have a lot of tics. He's very different from the Joker. And again, in keeping with this theme of a more grounded version of these characters, I think Aaron Eckhart does a spectacular job, and I think the way that Christopher Nolan handles Two-Face is ideal. I think I walked away from this movie at the time wishing that Two-Face had been the villain in the third one, and I still am not sure how I feel about that, but I think they did this about as well as could be done, given that Christopher Nolan is the type of person who likes to tell individual stories and not just worry about teasing sequels at the end or in post-credit sequences.
Yeah, man, like he was just so good in this movie. It's so sad to see him go from where he was at the beginning, the White Knight of Gotham, to being this tragedy and letting the Joker get to him, man. But that performance is it's great because like I read the comic afterward of The Long Halloween, which I think they got a lot of this Two-Face origin story from, because in that one it's just him and Harvey Dent, or Batman and Harvey Dent, working together to find out who the killer is. And eventually down the line, around like, I think it was like out of 12 chapters, like around chapter 9 or 10, that's when Two-Face gets turned into Two-Face on accident and ends up blaming Batman for it and blah blah blah, and you go from there. But like the build up to it, like I mean, I'm in the show, like kind of built up to it as well, right? The built up the Harvey Dent transformation, but you didn't get as much sympathy there, even in the animated show. Like I feel like here they really got you to sympathize with this Harvey Dent character because he truly was a White Knight. He truly was a good person, and like he wanted to do things right, and he wanted to take down the mob, and he didn't fear the mob. Even the mob was trying to kill him. Like they even kind of like replicated that scene from the I think it was Batman Forever, where you see the scene of him like getting attacked in a courtroom, and they kind of almost replicated that scene here in Dark Knight, except they didn't do the acid part of it. But man, like they really got like to the heart of the character, you know what I mean? And like him to be the one, the best of them, to be brought down to Joker and Batman's level, it's so heartbreaking to watch every time. You know what I mean? And I know he blames them, and it really is the Joker's fault, but he got psyched out and being convinced that it was like Gordon's fault and Batman's fault. But you know what I mean? Like Rachel's death will always be haunting him. I mean, up until he dies at the end of the movie. But like, and I know it haunts Batman as well. But man, that just him like hearing Rachel die and then like dying at the end. It's just so sad, man. It sucks, but like it's the story to tell because that is truly the story of Harvey Dent. And I kept thinking that too, like I wish that he would have lived and had a much bigger role in the universe, but like it does make sense that like if he is revealed to be this, like what he did afterwards and killed like 5 people, like all his cases would be thrown out. It's true, because it would have been just a mistrial. You know what I mean? Like, and that kind of logic and throwing that logic into it, it's like, God, I hate that it's logical and true, but like, yeah, if if that did happen, and it was revealed that he killed all those people afterward, all those criminals he put away would have to been released.
And these are ramifications that will be dealt with in The Dark Knight Rises in a really good fashion, and we'll talk more about that next week. So this next bit may be fake news, but I want to mention it anyway because it's too juicy not to mention. Because Rachel Dawes is not played by Katie Holmes. Instead, Katie Holmes was in a terrible movie with Queen Latifah and Diane Keaton that was called Mad Money, a movie that I know both of us have completely forgotten. But Sarah Michelle Gellar, Isla Fisher, Emily Blunt, and Rachel McAdams were all considered for this role before Maggie Gyllenhaal stepped in and was casted. The rumor is that Tom Cruise did not want Katie Holmes in this movie because Katie Holmes had a pretty intense love scene with Aaron Eckhart in Thank You for Smoking, and because Tom Cruise is incredibly insane, that is why she had to drop out of this film, because she was not allowed to be in a movie with Aaron Eckhart.
I've heard sort of the same story, and that's kind of what I remember at the time, but to be honest, like, you know, it is what it is. It's make your own decision, but at least it didn't feel like, a complete change. You know what I mean? It's like, when they changed the Mom and Family Matters for the last season kind of thing, where it was just completely, it just felt out of touch, or like out of place. This one didn't feel out of place.
Certainly not. And I think we've gone through enough notes, Brian. I think we can finally get to the actual categories.
Yeah, I'm ready, and like there was just so many notes, but we had to go through it all because this is quite the history, and there's a lot of history to it, and it's one of those things that it's a landmark in Hollywood history.
All right, let's talk about the heroes. Now we're going to kind of talk more about the plot mechanics and the characters as they are portrayed in the movie. And once again, we have Christian Bale playing the noble Bruce Wayne Batman, but in this case, he thinks he has found his way out. That Harvey Dent can be the hero that Gotham both needs and deserves, but ultimately he has to become the hero that Gotham needs and not the one that he deserves at the end, because he has to take the blame for the sins of one Harvey Dent. And I think that is something that is portrayed really well throughout. And I think the growl's louder. Like I said, I don't think it detracts nearly as much as a lot of people have said it does. I think he does get across the nobility and the personality of Bruce Wayne so well. And I actually think Christian Bale is much better in the first one. I don't think he gets as much to do here as far as development of his character. But I think as far as the action goes, and as far as the scenes that he has with the Joker, and the scenes that he has with Harvey Dent, I think Christian Bale is really good here again.
Yeah, man, when he's sitting there after Rachel's death, and he's just sitting there in the dark in his suit, and like just having almost like a mental like breakdown in his head, just going through the events of the night, like, oh man, that was just that's typical Christian Bale, like Batman, Bruce Wayne, like that's what I think of, you know what I mean? Him just brooding in the dark about his decisions and like what just happened. Like to me, that's like one of those iconic shots that we've talked about. But just to me, like he's hardly saying anything in that scene, but it just says so much about the character. You know what I mean? And we got a lot of that in the first one in Batman Begins, and we already got his origin story. So of course, we're going to spend a little less time on his, and focus more on like Two-Face and the Joker a little bit. But it was worth it. And like him and Alfred have this chemistry that that is still strong from the first movie, and like even with like the replacement of with Maggie Gyllenhaal being the replacement, I still think like he still had chemistry with both of them, and the scene that he had with Maggie Gyllenhaal about talking about giving up the life and all that kind of thing, that was a good scene there as well. Like he's really great in this, and like him, even when he's like being Bruce Wayne, he's still good. Like when he crashes the car, preventing Mr. Reese from getting hit or getting killed, like he's still in Bruce Wayne mode, and he's still like great as Bruce Wayne. And when he's throwing the party, he's still great as Bruce Wayne. And he even has a Ric Flair style entrance on a helicopter with 4 women at his penthouse. And I didn't even realize until I saw it lately, but god damn, that was such a Ric Flair entrance.
It really was. And you mentioned Alfred, and you could argue that he gets the best line in this movie when he says some people just want to watch the world burn. I think when Alfred talks about Burma, and he ends by mentioning this line and saying the line of some people just want to watch the world burn, that is one of the most iconic lines in the movie. And it's not even Batman or the Joker or Two-Face that says it, it's Alfred. And even the banter that they have afterward about Bruce and Alfred potentially taking the blame and who's going to take the blame, and tells Alfred that he's going to blame him for the whole damn thing. I mean, there's just so much great banter here. And even though Alfred doesn't get a whole lot to do in this specific case, even compared to the first one, I think it's really important for him. That relationship is so important because without it, it's really hard to ground Batman and for him to have people to talk to, quite frankly. And I think that's in a lot of cases, that's what Alfred's purpose is. But I think as kind of a side character, I think he's perfect in helping Batman, especially when Bruce Wayne is driving Lamborghini and Alfred is telling him about some of the cops who have family members in the hospital. Michael Caine, again, just does a really good job here.
He's unbelievable. He's the voice of reason in Batman's head. He's that father figure that's not there anymore, and Bruce Wayne knows it. He relies on him, and they need each other almost at this point. And that I still think of that scene where he's like telling him about the bandit in Burma, and the only way to catch him is you burn the whole forest down. And it's like, yeah, man, like you're really gonna have to do some shit, and you might have to question your ethics when trying to catch the Joker. That's basically what he's telling him, because like. He's even telling them, like, you spit in the faces of the criminals of Gotham. What did you expect? And it's like, yeah, I guess he's right. You know what I mean? Like, it's like shaking up, an animal cage. And, what do you expect as a result? You know what I mean? And he clearly tells Bruce Wayne, like, there are going to be consequences for your actions. You have to, like, own up to it and endure it, because otherwise, what was the point of it all? You know what I mean? You knew this was coming, and you just have to endure it. You know what I mean? He didn't expect someone like the Joker, and nor did Alfred probably, but like, these are the consequences of your actions, and he's telling him that. And it's not like he's saying it like in like a sarcastic way or like a patronizing way. He's telling him in like, yo, you have to endure this, otherwise this whole Batman concept was for naught, because you're just gonna give up, right? Like he's just talking about, like, you're just gonna give it up, all of a sudden. And he's telling him, like, you went through all this, you gotta endure it. And I love that whole, like, I think it was like 2 scenes of him advising him in the back, or the pseudo Batcave, and just him telling him the story. And then even like the little things, like even when he's talking to Rachel, like he still has this like fatherly role towards her. You know what I mean? And like the fact that he's protecting Bruce Wayne by burning the letter that would have broke his heart, and never ever gonna tell him until like 8 years later. You know what I mean? Just little things like that, man. And I can't believe they didn't think of like writing the Alfred character like this in the 90s, because it would have been such a great change of pace. But they didn't think of it, And I still, like, to this day, I never heard the phrase liquid courage being described, like, as champagne. So every time I drink champagne now, I'll always call it liquid courage.
While Alfred maybe gets the best line, Commissioner Gordon probably gets the loudest pop, so to speak, as he saves the mayor's life, and he saves Batman from being taken out by the Joker at the end of that scene. I remember watching that scene in general, and it was just one of the most thrilling things that I had seen on screen. And Nicky Cat just being completely absurd in that sequence, like talking about being turkeys on Thanksgiving, and just being generally goofy. And it's in full IMAX, so you're seeing like the full measure of everything that's going on. And it doesn't feel like it's CGI. It all feels real and organic. And it builds up to this moment with Batman and the Joker confronting each other. And it kind of reminds you a little bit of what happened at the end of the '89 movie. Except this time the Joker clearly has the upper hand. And just when it looks like things are going to go straight to hell, Commissioner Gordon comes out with a gun, takes his mask off. That is the loudest applause that I've ever heard for a movie that had not yet ended up until Avengers Endgame. There were definitely some holy shit moments in Avengers Endgame, but man, when Commissioner Gordon came out at the end there, that was a moment.
I remember my theater popping loud too, and I don't know what it is. I guess it was the idea that we're so used to like the idea of Gordon being this good guy, and then when you think he's done, right, like at the first act of the movie that they killed him off, it's like, oh wow, they killed off Gordon? Like holy shit. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't expect that. And then when he's still alive, and then I think the idea that he's such a good person in this universe that, like, you're just so much rooting for his character to do good and do the right thing and get the bad guy, that it was so rewarding to see him get the Joker. I think that was, like, that big cathartic moment that everyone was reacting to. because up until that point of the movie, it was just frustrating that the Joker was just getting ahead of him and being one step ahead of him. You know what I mean? And for that moment in time, like, Gordon getting the upper hand, it felt like this great wholesome moment. You know what I mean? I think that's what that cathartic moment feeling was at that time. And yeah, like, you don't get those kind of pops at that time in movies. And then like the MCU kind of changed that, where it seems like every MCU movie now has that big pop. But at the time, like, there wasn't that many movies getting big pops like that. And up until 2008, that was probably the biggest pop in a theater that I've heard.
And in continuing to talk about Commissioner Gordon, he is so worried and feels responsible at the end for everything that has happened. And even in that moment when he's talking with Batman and they're both on the roof, and he talks about how he has to save Harvey Dent and the fact that it is his family that is being threatened. It's really truly emotional, and we have invested time with this Commissioner Gordon. He's not a clown like he has been in the previous franchise and even on the TV show. This is a Commissioner Gordon that we've had to take seriously. And when you threaten his family, it means all that much more, because if you don't, then this is just a very pointless scene that maybe on the surface level it works because you're just pointing a gun at a kid's head, but the fact that it is Gordon's family makes it all the more meaningful, and it makes Gordon all the more heroic because they're telling a lie, and he's the one that has to sell the lie for everything to work out. And again, being that Batman and that Harvey Dent is the hero that Gotham deserves at the end.
Yeah, and when he's just yelling and he's sitting there, or he's like lying on the ground, and then he's like, "I'm sorry for everything." It's just like that's the one line in the movie where it just everything is just summed up. Everything is summed up into that one sentence where it's like, "I'm sorry for everything." He's taking responsibility, but you just feel like, man, you don't have to do that. It's not your fault. Like, it's the Joker. Like, the Joker pretty much got the best out of everybody by the end of this movie, and like, it feels like the Joker won at the end, and like, it really does. Even though like Joker gets caught or whatever, it just feels like he wins, and like him converting Harvey Dent into Two Face is part of that, and Gordon, just feeling guilty and just like absorbing all that guilt when he doesn't have to, and it's just like, it's heartbreaking, you know what I mean? And it sucks, but like he has to endure it, and that kind of sets up the next movie at the end. But you can tell like this Gordon is by far the best, and like this is like one of Gary Oldman's probably one of my favorite performances because it's just so wholesome and righteous, but like it's at the same time it's like it's like this metaphor for like struggling with actual morality and ethics and doing the right thing, and that's what this whole movie's about. It's about morality and ethics, mostly morality, but in a way it's kind of like a symbol and like a metaphor for the whole movie itself. That one line of like, "I'm sorry for everything."
Well, you speak about the morality and ethics, and that's something that Lucius Fox has to deal with, as he is kind of the impetus for how Batman ultimately discovers the Joker, as he is responsible for creating the sonar. He even controls it when they go to Hong Kong, and he's the one that helps Batman to find Lau. And then at the end, when Batman has the sonar built and Lucius Fox threatens to resign, it's Batman that says that you have the power and that you are the one that gets to make the decision. And that moment when Morgan Freeman smiles after typing in his name and the whole thing blows up, it's very subtle. It's not something that I caught on first viewing about his reaction, but it's so perfect in that moment. And Morgan Freeman does not get it. He gets much more to do in the third one, I think. But when Mr. Reese talks about threatening Bruce Wayne and exposing him as Batman, and Fox's reaction, and Morgan Freeman plays it so well about how absurd the notion is. It works out so great. Morgan Freeman, shockingly a great actor. I love the Q scene with him and Batman at the beginning where Batman talks about needing a suit where he can actually turn his head. My God, Morgan Freeman is like the seventh or eighth best actor in this movie, and he's incredible.
Yeah, and him going to China, that was a nice little detail there, and they tied in all these little things with like him being the president of the company now, or whatever it is, and him playing that role and playing the dual role of Q and the head of the company. I thought that was a nice little touch that they added, that because it's based on the ending of Batman Begins where he becomes the CEO or whatever, and him playing that face of the company role. I like that little touch they did there. And you talk about that scene at the end, him smiling. The thing is like, it's this idea that he was going to quit the company after helping him find the Joker because, ethics wise, like, you're spying on everyone in the city, right? But Batman gets so desperate that he feels like he has to do it in order to save the people of Gotham at this moment in time because Joker is just completely taken over, right? So it's just this struggle and this belief, but he's willing to help him this one time. But the idea of him like being reassured of like Batman's like faith, you know what I mean? Like his faith is reassured at that moment that he trusts Batman to only do this one time and not use this technology for other purposes or other, you know what I mean? Like he trusts Batman at that moment knowing that he was going to do the right thing by blowing up the machine and using it one time. So that was like a confirmation of his faith in Batman. That's kind of the way I see it because I've always noticed that moment too. Like he smiles of like, okay, he gets it because he knows Batman is going to only do this one time, and he still wants him on the team, and that he knows he respects Lucius Fox a lot, that he respects him a lot, and he respects his opinion, and that he's willing like to destroy this machine just to have him back on and just like reassure his that he's doing the right thing.
Let's talk about Rachel Dawes. I know you prefer Katie Holmes to Maggie Gyllenhaal. I don't think it necessarily matters all that much because Rachel Dawes, just like in the first movie, she's not a real person. She's treated as an object, and I think that's kind of crappy. But I think Maggie Gyllenhaal is significantly better in her delivery and in her performance. I think she brings a little bit more push back. She's able to push back against Bruce a little bit more effectively, and look, I just prefer Maggie Gyllenhaal as an actor, so perhaps it's my bias showing, but there really isn't a lot to talk about with Rachel Dawes. She gets fridged in the middle of it, and that's really what her purpose is.
Pretty much, but I don't know what it is. I just like Katie Holmes, just like the way that like she just handles like she was talking to young Bruce Wayne at the beginning of Batman Begins, and like the way that I feel like Katie Holmes's version kind of like keeps Bruce Wayne in check. And then this version of Maggie Gyllenhaal, I don't know, like necessarily keeps him in check, but like I don't know, it doesn't feel like that dynamic was there, the same one that Christian Bale and Katie Holmes had. I don't know what it is. I just felt like they had more chemistry, and they had like less to do here together. Only had a few scenes together, so they really couldn't play on what chemistry they could make. But I don't know. I just felt like Katie Holmes was more of like the Rachel Dawes in my eyes. You know what I mean? But to each his own. It's not like a big deal. But yeah, she was fridged in the middle. But I think like she was supposed to die in this movie anyway. Like she wasn't like I don't know. I mean, you could have put it in the third movie, but it would have made things complicated, I think. And I don't know. Just I think the idea that it feels like any prosecutor going up against the mob in the Batman universe almost has to die because like that's it feels like that's what's going to end up happening anyway. Because in this universe, it's just like no matter what you do, they're going to come after you if you're a lawyer or a prosecutor or whatever. And that's kind of like the deal because it ended up happening to Harvey Dent as well.
Christopher Nolan does not know how to write female characters, and that's why Dunkirk is the perfect Christopher Nolan movie, because it was literally a movie about a bunch of brunette dudes flying around, and there are no speaking parts for women.
Pretty much that's the whole movie, and that's why I'm not too big of a fan of Dunkirk.
We could talk about that for another time, I'm sure. So the actor who plays Wirtz, who has a hell of a Chicago accent, by the way. I don't know if you noticed that, Brian, but that the accent is thick.
That I didn't notice, but now that you mention it, I will have to notice now because obviously you would know.
The actor who played Wirtz was actually in The Fugitive, playing a very similar role as a Chicago cop, of course, in that movie. And what is significant about Wirtz acting against Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive compared to this movie?
Oh, the Two-Face tie-in.
Yep. So it's funny. It's funny how that works out. That he got to act against both actors who play Two-Face.
Well, I mean, technically not Billy D. Williams yet.
Right. That is true. I guess if they do another Lego Batman, they could conceivably do that. But we'll talk about Harvey Dent in the villain section. I think we've gone long enough with the heroes, as this podcast is now 55 minutes old, and we have just gotten through one category. Brian, despite my issues with the Rachel Dawes character, I am still giving this a full 10.
Yep, full 10 as well. The hero side is just such a strong group of actors. It's unbelievable that he got this cast together for this movie. A lot of memorable moments, and it's what Batman is. You know what I mean? Just a dark night, tragedy surrounding him. They got they got everything right about it this time.
Let's talk about the villains. The Joker is very, very good in this movie. Of course, I'm not sure if the boat plot necessarily makes sense, but he is a literal agent of chaos, and in every scene, I think there's so much to deconstruct from the opening sequence, the way that that is executed, and the fact that the Joker is ultimately the one who is just robbing the bank and killing everyone and taking a bus out and then merging that bus with other school buses. Just from that sequence alone, you get to learn so much about who the Joker is, and the moments with him burning the money, and with him showing them a magic trick in the office, and talking about tryouts. And there are just so many moments with the Joker that I could talk about. But ultimately, to me, why he works specifically in this movie is because he is grounded. He is not a cartoon character. I think Jack Nicholson and even Mark Hamill are cartoon characters, and there's nothing wrong with that. Let me emphasize that for those versions of Batman, I think they work out perfectly. I think for this version of Batman, you needed a Joker that was much more grounded, and that is who Heath Ledger was. And I think an underrated part of the Joker is kind of the music and the score that plays whenever he is around. And you get this a lot with Bane in The Dark Knight Rises, the score that plays behind when he is around. But it's interesting to note that there is a 9-minute composition that uses two notes. Those two notes are D and C. So whenever you hear the score behind the Joker and it sounds really menacing, know that that is basically DC.
Yeah, and then what they really were trying to do is it was just like two strings, and it's like almost like a razor grinding on strings kind of feeling, and that's kind of like the feeling. It's like on edge, tension, and like they really got that feeling down whenever you heard that theme, and that's gonna be part of the technical score as well when we talk about that. But goddamn, like when you hear that, it's just you immediately think of the Joker. I immediately, as soon as I hear those notes, I just see him standing there, back to me, holding the clown mask, whatever. You know what I mean? In the street, right at the beginning of the movie, like immediately, and it's so iconic. But yeah, I mean, we can talk about his performance all day, but um, just the little things that he does, and like keeping it grounded, like you said, and then just the line at the end where it's like, "This is the immovable force meeting or the irresistible force meeting the immovable object." And I marked out because obviously that's a line that almost every big WWF pay-per-view used in the early days, with like Gorilla Monsoon saying that line. So I marked out for that, and just the idea of putting that in my head, it's like, oh my god, they used that line, and I'm a big wrestling fan, so I thought that was a little cool thing they threw in there as well, even though it's like a more of a common phrase, but it's kind of associated with wrestling in my mind.
Absolutely. I was just so wholly impressed by what they were able to do here with the Joker character. And I think we've talked a great deal about Heath Ledger already, and I think we've talked about the Joker. Brian, is there anything else that you want to say about the Joker before we talk about Two-Face?
Um, it's pretty much it. I just want to mention that, like in the scene where he's in Wayne's penthouse and he's doing that shtick. I just want to point out that when he takes a sip of the champagne, he purposely spills the champagne out completely before taking a sip of an empty glass. Little things like that.
Yeah, that's a pretty great moment. It's funny because Bruce Wayne actually does the same thing later on because he's fake drinking because he's putting on a show for everyone. A nice parallel there between those two characters.
Yeah, that whole sequence up in the penthouse was great. It's great.
All right, we really haven't talked about Aaron Eckhart as Harvey Dent. I think this might sneakily be my favorite performance in the whole movie, even though I still think the Joker is objectively better. I think what they are able to do with Harvey Dent in this movie is they are able to both make you believe that he is a white knight who is the hero that Gotham deserves, but they also get across that he is a psychopathic menace at the end. And the fact that they are able to do this in a movie that is 2.5 hours is unbelievable to me, because there are Marvel movies when stuff like this happens and I'm like, I don't know if I buy it. Or there are certain moments, especially in movies, less so in TV shows, where you're like, I don't know if I get that. But in this case, I think the way that they are able to do it is unbelievable. And I think a lot of the credit has to go to the screenwriting, of course, in the way that the character is written. But I think you have to give a lot of credit to Aaron Eckhart as well, because just his actual look is he comes across as kind of your typical politician slash attorney who's very noble-hearted. But then at the end, you see that hint of darkness that is there. and I was just so impressed by his turn throughout. And I do like the scene, especially after the attempted assassination of the mayor, and you see a little bit of the darkness before he goes fully Breaking Bad style. But to me, Aaron Eckhart is such an underrated part of this movie that I think, quite frankly, I think he deserved an Academy Award nomination too. Because in a way, I think his role is even more complicated because the Joker is just chaos the whole way through, and he kind of plays one note, but he plays it so well that he, of course, deserved the award. But Aaron Eckhart has to play both the ultimate babyface and the ultimate heel, so to speak. And I think his ability to do that is what makes him such a good villain.
I almost don't want to consider him as a villain in this movie because, goddamn, like it really feels like Harvey Dent was a hero in this movie and Two-Face was truly a villain in this movie. Like that dichotomy of what that character is, they really got it down because it really feels split to me, like his character. Like God, he was such a heroic person. Like he stepped in and said he was Batman, saving Bruce Wayne's ass in front of everybody, knowing that Batman was going to be there to save him at the end because it was the right thing to do. Like that, God, that was such a great moment. You know what I mean? Like it's those little moments like that, and like him defending Batman, and like the idea of him like saying, "Yeah, we created Batman. We let these criminals like run over and run all over us. What did we expect? Like, of course, something like a Batman would come out." And he was defending him right at the beginning of the movie. You know what I mean? And like, God, and then when he gets that when he gets burned. And I'm glad it wasn't acid, by the way. I like that it wasn't acid because that just seems kind of ridiculous. Him just having burn marks, and the idea that he could easily get skin grafts and fix his face, but he doesn't want to because it's this constant reminder of like what happened that night and like all the shit that happened and like feeling like like Gordon turned on him and all these people turned on him and just feeling rejected. You know what I mean? Like, and not, you should have listened to me. You know what I mean? Like that stuff was great, and you can see the turn right there as he's lying in the hospital bed, and the sequence with him and Gordon, and then the sequence with him and the Joker, a perfect heel turn. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's a truly heartbreaking heel turn. Sometimes you see like one of the good guys at the beginning turn into the villain at the end, and you really don't care because you really didn't care about that character. But the way that they make you care about Harvey Dent right at the start, man, it's tragic, man. And you almost feel like at the end you kind of justify them like hiding all the murders that he did at the end of the movie to protect that image for what it stands for, and you buy into that. Like I bought into Harvey Dent right at the beginning. Like I remember the phrase "I believe in Harvey Dent." That thing came out, and it was such a big deal. And I remember that like that year during election year, right? We got these like special voting buttons at Blockbuster when I was working there that said I voted. But what I did was I took a black Sharpie and on top I wrote "I believe in Harvey Dent." Just to be that smart ass. You know what I mean? Even with like a little Joker face I wrote on it. I still have that button. I might take a picture of it, but man, like it really, his performance just as Harvey Dent really kind of got to me. Just seeing how one man can try so hard and just be turned, and the best of us being turned, and it sucks, but it's just kind of this life lesson of just like standing strong, not giving in, and no matter how tough and no matter how much you feel like everyone's betrayed you, you got to just kind of like stick with it and not fall to the dark side as well.
Right, and I think something that I think we see in a number of superhero movies is kind of these twists with the villains. It's something that we've seen even in recent superhero blockbusters. The fact that we all know that he's going to be Two-Face in the end, and the fact that this still works out so well, and it does feel tragic. It does not feel like, oh, well, it's time for Harvey Dent to become Two-Face now. The fact that it feels tragic, I think, just speaks to how well this movie executes its message. And I think for all of the things that the wrong lessons have been taken away from this movie by a lot of people. But one of the right lessons is to invest in your characters. And in this case, so many of these protagonists have been invested in. But these two villains, the Joker and Two-Face, even though we don't know their origin stories, they are invested in as characters. And the other villains, Michael Jai White, who's in this movie, better known as Spawn, Eric Roberts, who is a 1980s actor special. So one of the things that Christopher Nolan loves to do is he loves to take 1980s actors and he puts them in his movies. So if you go back to Batman Begins, you will see Rutger Hauer, you will see Eric Roberts, and Anthony Michael Hall in this movie. If you watch Inception, you'll get some Tom Berenger in your life. If you watch The Dark Knight Rises, you of course get Matthew Modine. So it's just something he likes to do. He likes to give struggling actors work, Brian. And Eric Roberts is kind of a cartoon. I almost think it works a little better here because he's not as important to the plot as Tom Wilkinson. And Chan Han is also very good as Lau. And just, I think the interrogation scene and even the scene when he's on the TV, I think those are pretty funny. That entire sequence in Hong Kong is just because everything else is so great, but that sequence in Hong Kong rules and would be the best fight scene in a lot of movies.
Yeah, the scene in Hong Kong is just so well shot because I think what it is like the glass building and seeing like the land or like the skyline through the glass. When they do those shots up at the top of the building, it looks spectacular, man, because it just puts everything in this wide kind of scope. But yeah, and I forget the name of the other gangster guy too, but like I think he was like a Greek guy, the guy that he burns the money right in front of, the Joker. He's great too. I can't remember his name, but he's great in that little role as well because he knows like what's up and the fact that like he was like the Joker was right. We got to give him half our money because he's right. We got to kill the Batman. That's the only way to get out of this. And that was a good little thing too. Eric Roberts, man, I thought him like the first minute I saw him like, oh great, like this is gonna be real cheesy. But when he's like started talking, is like I don't know what it is. He did a great job in this movie, man. And I thought like, are we gonna get an Eric Roberts like comeback now or what? Never happened, but still like he did a great job in this movie. I thought being that like a smarky little, like a guy you just wanted to punch in the face. You know what I mean? And he played that role really well.
Right, and for all those reasons, I'm also giving the villains a perfect 10.
Perfect 10 as well. If I can give an 11, I would, but we're not in Spinal Tap world.
No, we certainly are not. Let's talk about the story. I do have issues with the story, but I do want to focus on some of the positives, of which there are many. The opening scene establishing how organized and dangerous Joker is, with another wonderful character actor performance from William Fichtner. This opening sequence is just amazing to watch because of just the execution and how simple it is, but how dense it is. I love the use of IMAX in the opening scene, even though it's not a quote-unquote action scene. You get that big, iconic shot of the Joker at the end where we see him for the first time. We also see Batman impersonators trying to help against the Scarecrow as Cillian Murphy returns. Batman gets a new suit. And we see a lot of dogs. I had forgotten how many dogs are in this movie. Christopher Nolan must be a cat person because he does not like dogs in this movie.
See, I thought that was the joke. Like, we're getting all these dogs because he knew we were giving us Catwoman. He even says, like, well, it'll be good against the cat, right? Remember that line from Lucius Fox? So I thought that was like a subtle hint of what was to come, maybe? Because there was a lot of dogs.
There certainly was a lot of dogs. The mob is running scared because of both Batman and the Joker. At this point, Lau takes their money to Hong Kong, but Batman brings it back. This is the first movie where Batman has left Gotham City, and I couldn't help but think about in Batman vs. Superman, we don't even see Batman in Metropolis. It's Bruce Wayne that goes to Metropolis. So this is the only movie where we've seen Batman go international.
Yeah. Kind of questioning like the extraditing kind of laws and stuff like that, but because he is Batman, he can extradite whoever the fuck he wants and get away with it.
Look, there are just some times when you just have to kind of move on and not ask too many questions, as is the case with a lot of superhero movies. The Joker really doesn't become the main villain until about 45 minutes in, when the mob hires him to kill Batman, and then we get a lot of chaos as the Judge and Commissioner Loeb die. Gordon fakes his own death while Batman and Dent apparently work out a plan for Dent to admit that he is Batman. The plot mechanics of that don't quite work, but I think there's such a great payoff that it's, again, one of those things that is very quickly forgotten. And, of course, we get that iconic action scene where they have to drive under Lake Street. And do you want to talk about Nicky Katt for a brief moment here?
Nicky Katt?
Yes, the actor Nicky Katt. He is in the passenger seat, and he's the one that talks about how they're like turkey on Thanksgiving.
I kind of put that out of my head, to be honest. I barely remember that.
because it's kind of out of a different movie at a certain point. But one of the things that Christopher Nolan loves to do is, especially in these big chase sequences, is he has an audience surrogate that is not Batman. It's something that we saw in The Dark Knight Rises with the two cops who, the older cop is telling the younger cop about how they're in for a show tonight, and in this case, it's Nicky Cat just commenting on things that are going on. And I think, again, these movies get accused of not having humor, but one of the funniest moments of the entire movie is when one of the cops says that the Joker is going to need something bigger to take out the van, and he literally pulls out a bazooka. There was some laughter, which, again, playing into some of the dark comedic elements, but there was actual laughter when Joker did that.
Now I remember. Now I know exactly what you're talking about, where he's literally narrating the chase sequence with the car, like the trucks. Yeah, yeah, totally. Like I remember that clearly. That's his sense of humor. Yeah, and it was pretty random, but like it does put the audience in that perspective, and he's like, "Is that a bazooka?" And then boom, he shoots the bazooka. But that's quite the moment. Um, yeah, I just feel like Joker going out and killing all those people was such a great. I don't know. It felt like a nod to I don't know The Godfather, right? Like when he was killing all those people at the same time, it felt like I was watching the scene at the end of The Godfather where the baptism by fire, where he just kills all the heads of the five families. It felt a lot like that. I don't know if I read somewhere that he was trying to emulate that, but goddamn, the parallel editing where parallel editing is like where you're editing sequences next to each other but showing little bits and pieces back to back, and then it all kind of accumulates into this one big sequence at the end where all the five sequences kind of feel like merging into one. And that's kind of what they did here. It was like when he's killing those people back to back to back, it felt like that sequence from The Godfather. So that was really well done. Like I love those kind of sequences where they edit multiple sequences together and then it kind of builds up the tension. And then like the thing with the boat, like we forget when we mention the boat stuff, like the idea. I think what he's going for is that I always remember this thing that Hitchcock said, Alfred Hitchcock. Play a scene where like people are eating breakfast, right? And play it for 15 minutes. Play the scene again, but then tell the audience that after the 15 minutes a bomb will go off and everyone's going to die, right? But the idea is never let the bomb go off and just let the tension build and build and build and build and then just let the audience freak out and then the bomb doesn't go off and then the audience feels relieved. And that's essentially what happens at the end with the two boats when he puts the two boats against each other, the Joker, and he tells one boat, one with criminals, one with regular citizens, like, I'm going to give you the key, or I'm going to give you the button to each bomb. You're either going to blow each other up, or one of you is going to blow each other up, and we're going to have some fun and a social experiment. And I love, the heart of that scene to me is just like him testing out, morality, like in the general public, and the idea that you build up this big explosion that doesn't even happen, and that kind of tension just builds up for 10 minutes of the movie. I love that sequence. So there's a lot of things going on with the plot, like we mentioned, like a lot of great storytelling, a lot of great character development, but a lot of little things like that kind of brings up the tension and does like these old school, like Hollywood techniques of like teasing something that's going to create this tension that, doesn't even happen. That's such a Hitchcock thing to do.
The boat sequence is probably the best executed version of a not so great idea. I'm still not sure that the actual mechanics of it work for me, but I think the way that it's done, the score, again, the iconic building up of the tension makes it so good that I can't really ding it too badly. Something that has always bothered me, though, is the Joker does not give Batman a true choice in who to save. I don't even know why that necessarily bothers me, but to me, the Joker is kind of this agent of chaos, and it shouldn't bother me that he lied, but for some reason it does, that he basically gives Batman a false choice, when to me, the idea is that that is what he is supposed to do as an agent of chaos, and I almost wish that from a storytelling perspective that Batman had decided to save Harvey Dent instead of Rachel as a choice, because because of who Harvey Dent is and who he can represent. I almost think as a storytelling choice that would have been better. But the movie at a certain point, I think it becomes so good that from a storytelling perspective I still really, really like it, and I will go as high as an 8 for this.
I'm going to go with a 10 because there are just so many iconic things from the script that people still like use. I don't know, like just the idea that, oh my god, he wanted to get caught. That trope has become such a trope in so many movies now that they've stole from this. he wanted to get caught. You see it in James Bond. You see it in the Mission Impossible series now. Even in the regular MCU, you see this kind of trope going on. So I'm giving it a 10 still, just because like there's so many things about the script, the tragedies, the story arcs, just everything about it, and just so many things that people steal from this movie, the script. For me, everything just kind of works on this level that kind of just. If I could have given 11, I couldn't give it 11, but I can't. So I'm going to give it a 10.
All right, let's talk about the technical aspects, which I think are the strongest aspect of this movie ultimately. I think the editing hides some of the story issues in a way. This movie's 2.5 hours. I couldn't believe that I looked down at my phone and it was 2:30 in the morning when I saw this at a midnight screening on the first night. Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard coordinated on the score, and it's iconic. The Batman score is so great. The IMAX cameras make this a very unique looking film, and even still, I think it looks ahead of its time. I think the CGI is seamlessly added into the movie as The Dark Knight retains a grounded but much more urbanized look. This movie feels so much more urban than the first or the third one in a way, and I think so much of that is because a lot of it takes place at Wayne Tower, and a lot of this movie is taking place in high offices. So I love the look of this, and again, I'm going with a perfect 10 for the technical part.
To me, this is controversy, maybe. Here we go. I think this is the greatest like superhero soundtrack of all time. Like there are so many songs that keep playing in my head from the soundtrack. Like even when I go work out sometimes, I'll listen to like bits and pieces of the soundtrack just to get me motivated and going. I know I'm not the only one who does that too. I know some buddies of mine who still listen to the soundtrack when they work out because it just gets them going. You know what I mean? The Joker theme, the Batman theme, it just builds up and builds up and builds up. You know what I mean? And Hans Zimmer did an iconic job with the score. We talked about the IMAX stuff and how much that was an influence on the modern era in terms of cinema. Um, just all the little things, the colors. There's this kind of like blue kind of filtered throughout the movie that's during the night shots that kind of echoes throughout the movie. Little details like that. And then even the daytime stuff looks fantastic. Like I mentioned before, the stuff with China, and you see the skyline through the glass window and him breaking the glass window, and then the shot of him going in the plane, and then, you know, recreating the shot from Batman Begins, him standing at the top of whatever statue that was. Just incredible stuff. Perfect 10 for me. A lot of this stuff is, you know, influential now, and that's going to tie in the legacy score.
For the legacy, this is a movie that won multiple Academy Awards, including the first and to this point only acting award for someone in a superhero movie. Many films took the wrong lessons from this film, but this made superhero filmmaking something that could be taken even more seriously than Batman Begins. Batman Begins did have some success, but this took it to a whole nother level. And I can't blame this movie. I can't blame Christopher Nolan for other studios, including Warner Brothers, taking the wrong lessons. You cannot hold this movie accountable for the stupidity of others. The fact that this is the reason why the Academy made up to 10 films eligible for Best Picture, I think is also a part of legacy, and obviously part of it is also tied to Wall-E. This made Christopher Nolan a big-time, important director, and I think it gave him essentially a blank check to do whatever movies that he wanted to do from this point forward. Because anything that he does from this point forward is much bigger and much louder and much longer than anything that he did before. And I think that has its good points and its bad points, but Inception might be my favorite Christopher Nolan movie of all time, even more than this one. And I think that partially plays into that. So, for all those reasons, I'm also giving the legacy of this movie a perfect 10.
Yeah, this might be the highest legacy of any movie we're going to review. Like I feel like this changed everything. Like every little thing, it changed everything about what we know about music scores for superhero movies. It changed what we knew about how to shoot a superhero movie. It changed like what we know for performances for a superhero. Like up until this point, I never thought that there would be someone winning an Oscar as a performance for a comic book movie, and Heath Ledger completely changed that aspect and that notion. You know what I mean? It changed the Oscars from going from 5 to whatever they want to pick, from 5 to 10 now. A lot of things just completely changed because of this movie. The first Batman movie to get $500 million domestically, right? Like it completely doubled the domestic gross of the first Batman Begins movie, like little things like that, and just like how much it influenced Warner Brothers. You know what I mean? So a perfect 10 for me again. So this whole this whole movie's like a perfect 10. Um, yeah, 50 straight up. And to me, it's the GOAT. And I don't think there's any question about it. This movie might be too good for its own good. Whereas, like, you talk about the lessons that people got from this and taking the wrong lessons from it. So, yeah, it's very much a great legacy, but also a legacy of, like, ah, shit. People are going to be ripping off the Dark Knight now in the wrong ways.
Well, my score is actually lower. I only am giving this a 48, which means the total is a 98. This is by far a wide margin the highest rated movie that we have ever had on the Superhero Pantheon. And I cannot say that I'm too surprised by that because I think this is what we've been building to in a way. So The Dark Knight is not only in the Superhero Pantheon, but it is even above any other movie in the Pantheon score-wise. So congratulations to Christopher Nolan and The Dark Knight for getting this. And I don't think this is a major surprise to either one of us. I think that even 11 years later, this movie is so effective. And it's something that I will rewatch at least once a year. And just like so many other Christopher Nolan movies, I think it is incredibly rewatchable. The visuals are amazing. And I think in this case, you've got so many great performances up and down. It's not just one or two great performances. Look, the Joker and Two-Face are great, but I think Morgan Freeman and Michael Caine, I mean, I think the people on the sidelines of this movie are so great too. And even though I made fun of Nicky Katt, I think Nicky Katt has a purpose in this movie. And for all those reasons, that's why The Dark Knight is in the Superhero Pantheon.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else you can say about it, and almost like I wish that it was slightly not as good because then I don't know, you can get away with some stuff because like I feel like people just the way we just put it on a pedestal, like the highest marks we can give it. It's just that people are just going to be trying to emulate this so much now, and they've been trying so hard to do it. Like I mentioned before, the idea that the Joker wanted to get caught. They do this exact thing in the James Bond movie with what was it? Skyfall, I think it was, where it was the exact same thing, and then they did the exact same thing in the latest Mission Impossible. So, just stuff like that, and how influential it is, and like the tragedy behind it all. It's just like this moment in cinema history that I don't think can be replicated. Endgame can try all it wants to replicate that, but there's just too many, too many lightnings in the bottle in one movie. You know what I mean? It's not just the Heath Ledger performance. It's just the IMAX stuff, the script writing, everyone else being on their A game. It was just everything coming together for this one perfect moment in time.
All right, let's get to the burning questions. Is Heath Ledger's Joker the greatest acting performance ever in a superhero film?
Yes. Um, it's hard to say because like Robert Downey Jr. is so spectacular as as Iron Man, but that's like a cumulative of like nine movies. You know what I mean? This is just one movie from Heath Ledger, and it still stands the test of time. He's incredible. It's the GOAT performance, the greatest performance in the history of comic book movies. One of the top performances in the history of cinema. To be honest, like it completely changed everything about the Oscars and how critics kind of perceive superhero movies up at that point. I think one of the few people that kind of saw comic book movies as like a respectable thing was like Roger Ebert at the time. You know what I mean? Like he would still give out like 4-star reviews to like Sin City and Batman Begins and stuff like that. But he was one of the first to kind of recognize that. So
All right, who is the better Rachel Dawes, Maggie Gyllenhaal or Katie Holmes? I think we have two different answers because mine is Maggie Gyllenhaal because I just think she's a better actor, and I know you're going to say Katie Holmes, right?
yeah, it's just something about Maggie Gyllenhaal in this movie seems a little too confident in terms of prosecutor. Like when she's talking to Harvey after the attempted shooting incident inside the courtroom, like she just seemed too confident. You know what I mean? Like the Rachel that I was used to from Batman Begins would have just taken that like, okay, we got to take this seriously. They're trying to kill us. We can't go out there like trying to like put it out there that we're trying to get these criminals and blah blah blah. Like there's like a clear distinction between the two, and like I like the less happy Rachel Dawes and the more serious Rachel Dawes.
I think the reason that Rachel Dawes might be a little bit more confident in this movie is because Harvey Dent is a better prosecutor. Batman is around, so I think the confidence comes from those things.
I don't know. It just didn't seem right because to me, Rachel Dawes would have just not been so cocky to me. But because she's dealing in this game of death kind of thing, but she ends up dying anyway. But that's why I was kind of like, don't be so cocky. Like you can die at any moment in this universe. You know what I mean?
What is one, or how much stock would you have bought in Aaron Eckhart's career at this point?
I mean, a lot because what Thank You for Smoking was 3 years before this. I had watched that like a year or two prior, and I thought, man, what a great, smart performance in this movie where he was being funny and dramatic. And Thank You for Smoking. Here he becomes like this totally other character. And after this, I thought, man, he's gonna get a lot of mainstream roles. It didn't really happen, and it sucks because I remember seeing him even when I was working at Whole Foods, like years later, probably months before Dark Knight Rises came out, and I was like, oh my God, it's Two Face. And then I was starting to think like, how come he hasn't like really had a career since then? Since Dark Knight, I don't know what it is. Maybe he got typecasted. I think he had some straight to DVD movies that didn't go off so well. Maybe that was it.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because I really like him in this film, and other than those goofy Fallen movies with Gerard Butler, it feels like he hasn't really had a whole lot to do. What is one bad lesson superhero films have taken from The Dark Knight?
I think you mentioned it last week, but confusing darkness with like, you know, literal darkness and like making things too dark for when it doesn't have to be, and making it dark when it has to be. Finding that distinction. Yeah, this movie's very dark, but it has its humorous moments as well, like we talked about. But some movies just take that idea of being dark and take it way off the wall, and that's kind of what Suicide Squad probably tried to do with a little too much when in terms of the Joker performance and stuff like that. And just taking this idea that the Joker has to be this crazy, like, like comedic, like laughing in a weird way all the time and like murdering people. Yeah, he does all that, but to me, like, I don't know, Heath Ledger made it really real. You know what I mean? Not just like this pretending to be crazy and be goofy kind of crazy kind of thing. Like I even see wrestlers today taking this idea that we have to be like this crazy Joker like villain character to get over as a heel, and like to me that's again an example of taking the wrong kind of lesson from it because you're not doing it right. You're just trying to be crazy for the sake of being crazy, like a Bray Wyatt or something like that, or like when Sting tried to do it in TNA all those years ago. Like I just feel like wrestlers try to emulate this role now of this Joker character, but they don't get the heart of it.
They certainly do not. And I want to extend what I talked about last week, not just to confusing darkness, but the DCEU becomes very cynical after this. People hate Superman. Superman hates Batman. Batman hates Superman. Lex Luthor kind of hates everybody. There is a cynicism about people and about humanity that develops over the course of the Zack Snyder movies that I find to be very disturbing. And these movies are not cynical. They're actually very hopeful. That's what people, I think, completely miss is the hopeful aspects of this movie. That Gotham ultimately, in the end, Gotham is good. Batman is good. They want Harvey Dent to be good. And I think that's something that people really miss out on. What is one actual lesson superhero films should take away from The Dark Knight?
Just treat your characters seriously and not make them hokey and like too cartoonish. And if you're going for the cartoonish aspect of it, that's fine. But then, you know what I mean? Like, you gotta just give it some kind of substance, you know what I mean? Like, make us care and not just give us these characters on the surface and just have them do shit for the sake of doing shit. Give us a reason as to why they're doing these things. You know what I mean? Like, true character development. That's why I feel like this Two-Face character, this Harvey Dent version that Aaron Eckhart does is, like, so good because you're so rooting for him, like at the start of this movie, up until like even two-thirds of the movie, you're still rooting for him, right? Because you want him to succeed and you want him to be the White Knight, and the movie makes you care so much. But by the end, like it becomes this dark thing because of the tragedy involved. So that's one lesson they can take is just actual great character development and give it a good arc and like a good payoff.
All right, Brian, we have talked about 90 minutes for this movie. It is going to be one of our longest episodes ever. I think it's justified based on how good this movie is and how important it is to the history of superhero filmmaking. Brian, I don't have a lot to say here at the end. I just want to mention the fact that we are going to be reviewing The Dark Knight Rises, a kind of a maligned movie relative to the other two Christopher Nolan directed Batman movies. But Brian, I am looking forward to next week because unlike a lot of other people, I think we are actually going to defend The Dark Knight Rises in a pretty big way.
It does have its flaws. There is some timing issues, some chronology issues, some confusing aspects of the plot line. We'll get into that next week, but I mean, still, like, it's still like a great Bruce Wayne who's been away for 8 years. Still a great Bane character. A lot of good things about it. A lot of great visuals. So there's a lot of great things about it. Is it as great as Dark Knight? No, it's not. But it does have a lot of great qualities, and still like has some like legacy qualities as well, because a lot of people still do that Bane impersonation that Tom Hardy did.
Absolutely. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening to us again this week. We will talk to you again next week for The Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, I don't think my pencil trick is as good as the Joker's.